All right, thank you everyone so much for joining, and welcome to Trust, Transparency, and Digitalization in Denmark. My name is Madeline Smith, and I'm the Program Manager for MIT Denmark, which is part of MISTI at MIT. I just want to start by thanking everyone who made this webinar possible, including our presenters, Søren Juul Jørgensen and Rasmus Hawk, as well as our moderator, Kathleen Thelen, and the Center for Human Rights and International Justice at Stanford University, as well as 2021 AI. I also want to thank the Confederation of Danish Industry for their key role in making this event and the MIT Denmark program possible. A few practical matters before we begin. I recommend that you select the speaker view at the top of your screen instead of gallery view. Video and microphones will remain disabled for the attendees for the duration of the webinar, but we encourage you to engage with us via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions at any point, and we will aim to answer as many as possible during the webinar. But do feel free to send any follow-up questions to me at mit-denmark@mit.edu. Lastly, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded to share with those who were unable to make it today. Now I want to introduce our moderator. Kathleen Thelen is Ford Professor of Political Science at MIT and permanent external member of the Max Planck Institute in Cologne, Germany. She is a comparative political economist whose work focuses on cross-national variation in labor market policies and social policies across the rich democracies. Her most recent book is Varieties of Liberalization and the New Politics of Social Solidarity. Her research recently has turned to the politics of digital capitalism, where she has published studies of the comparative regulation of Uber and other issues relating to the politics of the so-called platform economy. She recently completed a book co-edited with Jacob Hacker, Alexander Hertel Fernandez, and Paul Pearson on the American political economy and comparative perspective. She's also the faculty director of the MIT Denmark program. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Madeline. And I just want to add my thanks to everyone who made this webinar possible, especially our distinguished speakers. And also, I want to just really add a warm thank you to the Confederation of Danish Industry, DI, which has been an extraordinary partner for MIT and for MIT's MISTI Denmark program. It's really been an absolute pleasure working with them over the years. So the real stars of this seminar are our two distinguished speakers, and we'll have them present sequentially. And I'll begin with Søren Juul Jørgensen and introduce him. Then we'll have a few minutes of questions after his presentation, and then we'll move to Rasmus Hawk, and I'll introduce him at that time. And then again, there'll be a little time for questions specifically on his presentation before we move to a general sort of Q&A at the end of the session. So Søren Juul Jørgensen is a fellow at the Center for Human Rights and International Justice at Stanford University. His work focuses on technology, ethics, and the law, and on business and human rights. He is the founder of the strategy firm Forest Avenue, which has offices in Brussels, Copenhagen, and Silicon Valley. He's also co-founder of Sustainery, which supports innovation in the context of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Søren previously worked as CEO for the Danish Innovation Center in Palo Alto and as Consul General of Denmark to California, focusing on technological innovation and tech-related engagement to support startups, corporate innovation, and research collaboration between Denmark and the United States. Søren worked as a diplomat for the Danish Foreign Service and for international tech companies such as Maersk Data and IBM. He taught law at the University of Copenhagen and has worked as a spokesperson for the Danish government, also as a European Union negotiator and a lawyer representing Denmark at the European Union Court in Luxembourg. Søren is also a mentor and an advisor for various startup firms. So as you can hear, he is a really busy guy, and we are absolutely delighted and really lucky to have him today. So Søren.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm really very happy to be here and to take part in this important discussion. I think I'll go right at it, and I'm just fighting to get the presentation up. Am I sharing? Good. So I really just have 4 points to make. One, that there is a high social trust in the Nordic countries, and why that is the case, and what we can sort of take away from that. How that impacts the way businesses run in the Nordics, and what the takeaways are in relation to that. The level of the digital development in the Nordic countries, and how that relates to trust, and then a few comments on what the takeaways might be, and whether this is relevant globally. And as a spoiler alert, yes. To that question is, I think there are takeaways, and I think it is relevant globally. I think some of the main areas of importance is the collaborative approach, the strong focus on transparency, and the strong focus on education in all of that. So very briefly, we're at the moment working on a project on responsible digital leadership. We call it. We're working with a group of banks and insurance companies on how to integrate some of these guidelines and values that have emerged the past years into business practice. So we are looking at sort of governance and guidelines for that. And so the realization we have on that is exactly that this is very much an interplay between sort of roles and methods and open governance. It's the core are the values and design processes, and then of course how you validate that in a process leading towards whatever customer product and service. But the point or the takeaway from that is that sort of the leadership approach, the management style, and the transparency and those values, how they permeate those processes, are extremely important. That's also why we've sort of moved a little bit further from that in looking at how you can sort of develop an education platform or a training platform to promote such ideals. And we're currently working with a group of about 40 students from 17 countries on preparing what we call a dilemma library, which will be a learning platform to promote understanding of what might go wrong, and in order to better relate to that. So so we have a strong focus on that, on what the environment that trust lives in, and why it is important. So trust in the Nordics, there are quite a few signals or indicators of this. One of them is the sort of consistent position as least corrupt countries in the world. And I've sort of in this just talk to the Nordics as a group, because this is true for Denmark, but it's also true for Finland, Sweden, and Norway. So it's a general trend. So there's a very low corruption. It's a corruption perception index, but there's a very low corruption in the Nordics in general. And you can see the same sort of trend on a strong social trust in a number of other indicators. Surveys such as would you say most people could be trusted? That's on the upper left side there, on the upper left corner of the screen. The darker color is a higher trust in that. You can see it in the social trust in European countries, that the same group, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, come out as countries with a very high level of social trust. And the bottom right corner, you sort of see this indication that there's a strong trust also in institutions. So this is trust in police versus trust in people. So there's a very strong general level of trust. There's also, just to make that point, a very high level of, or very low level of economic social inequality, as shown from the Gini index here. So there's a number of indicators that we have high social trust. We also know that there are benefits from that. I mean, we have a lower transaction cost in our economy. We have even higher happiness related to that, and there are a number of other factors. I think the main takeaways from this and the history around this is, does it go? I mean, we even have research that shows that this started way back in the Viking ages, and they had to perhaps trust each other when they agreed to meet sort of off the western coast of Denmark to go to England in the spring, and they sort of had to have that kind of trust. We even have research indicating that the sort of low hierarchy of the Protestantism was important, and we've seen that there's actually higher levels of social trust among Swedish immigrants in the US than in the rest of the society. But I think what really drove the high level of trust was the development of the industrial society in the mid sort of around 1860 and forward, especially around the 1900, with the emergence of strong associations, a strong focus on learning and education, and especially perhaps the emergence of strong trade unions coming out of this sort of culture of association, and the very firm establishment that the labor markets and with that a number of issues around society are actually managed in tripartite negotiations involving sort of the employees, the employers, and society, and that there's a free negotiation right, but we sort of founded that kind of collaborative model which has permeated into society in general. And so this is really what you have on the screen is, I think, really a blueprint. Is not necessarily the blueprint, but it is a blueprint, and I think it's a trend and characteristics of the Nordics, and why we have this level of trust. So we can actually trust in the state. We give the state our children at the age of 2 and trust them to take care of them through kindergarten and education and so forth. And we do that because we feel we can trust the state, which is characterized by openness, transparency, accountability, and perhaps most importantly, the sort of flexicurity approach of the labor market, with this sort of collaborative approach with the associations, and the realization of the state that we need a safety net, and we sort of prevent the emergence of a poor underclass. And then I think what is really important is the level of the high focus on education in society. And so these values run through in business as well, founded on a quite sort of ethical approach to business, a collaborative approach, low power hierarchy, and I write on the screen symbiotic. That may be taking it too far. That sort of the relation between the industry is directly symbiotic, but there's an early realization on the side of industry in this sort of collaborative system that you have to take into account a number of sort of societal aspects, sustainable aspects, and so forth. That agenda is generally old with the business in the Nordics, and so many of the same sort of values and approaches are seen also in the way business is run. And again, a strong focus on education, allowing for flexibility in the labor market. So moving on to the digital, just stating again statistics, the Nordics come out as the most digital countries in the most digitized countries, and there are many indicators for it. It's a general trend. It hasn't dropped from the sky. Again, it comes out of a planned and diligent approach, and perhaps most notably, it comes out of that same sort of collaborative approach, where the state has played a role in facilitating the development, making plans and strategies and so forth, and done that in an open dialogue with both actually the industry. Confederation of the collaboration with the Confederation of Industry is a good example, but also with the trade unions and the employer side. And that gives us that obviously gives us quite a few sort of advantages, and we've taken it quite far. We are all more or less born with a number. The Danish social security number, the CPR we call it, is the number we are all given when we are born, and which follows us through life. And as we have a very digital society, we also have a rich opportunity to harvest data about all of us. We have really large and very precise public databases on a number of areas. And as we have the key to it through the social security number, the CPR number, we can actually use those very actively for good. We can use them for research, which is I think in many ways a quite unique asset in developing that. And we've taken this digital approach very far in the services we offer to our citizens, and that has also shown some of the challenges. So you could be divorced in Denmark in just about a week for $60 online. I think it actually became so easy to do that politicians inserted a sort of a 3-month reflection period into this digital process. But we've also seen sort of the general risk of algocracy, and so the large access to digital and data provides for quite many opportunities also for society. One example is the Danish municipality Gladsaxe, who were digitally savvy and who saw the opportunities of using data and cross-referencing data from the bases they had, to the extent that they could, a little bit like Minority Report through predictive analytics, foresee where special care would or might be relevant. So which kids were actually at risk, and in order to sort of initiate an early dialogue with this. A good cause, a good purpose, of course, but certainly rising issues on privacy and quite a few ethical issues. There are similar examples, Danish authorities wanting to use sort of electricity bills to validate who actually lives on a specific address for various other purposes. And so in a society that's very organized and very and has access to all this data, you also have those opportunities in doing that. I think we've looked actively at how to manage that. We've and I can perhaps reference that to some of my own experience from Silicon Valley. I was there from 2014 to 2018, and through those years we saw a number of Danish operators or entities. We saw first the Danish startups, then we saw the Danish corporations, and then we saw the Danish sort of government visiting to learn, and then we saw the trade unions and the industry organizations, all there first to learn about disruption and understanding what was happening out of Silicon Valley and how was the impacting society, and then coming back to understand how to manage that. And so that's where the sort of, I think the trust and the collaborative approach really sort of hits that digital or those digital risks, and quite a number of actions were or have been taken in a process which is not over. The Danish government early sort of decided on an ethical code. For this, we established an ethical council. Before that, we had established a disruption council, looking at what the impacts were on society. And we've now also, on top of GDPR and such, made legislation on data reporting for industry in approaches that are certainly not over. And I think what is important here is the takeaway is the collaborative approach. That we saw leaders of the trade unions very early visit Silicon Valley to try to understand what was happening and how might that impact the Danish labor market. and being part of this tripartite, because the Disruption Council and the Ethical Council has all been sort of done in that collaborative and embracing way, inclusive way, involving both industry and employees or trade unions in that kind of dialogue with the state. And so just to sum up, we are generally sort of moving into a digital area with of course, as we all know, numerous challenges, changing and challenging many of the ways that we have established ourselves in. It raises ethical issues. It raises sort of social issues on future of democracy. It raises issues relating to future of work and how we manage and organize our companies. And just to sum up, with the question whether sort of the Nordics have the answer to all that, I'm not sure the Nordics can do all that. We are small countries, but I do think that there are some very important sort of takeaways from the way we've developed that trust and how we've sort of nurtured and managed it, how we've integrated into the way business is organizing. I think they go back to exactly a number of ethical values permeating the way sort of government is run and how business is run, notably transparency and fairness. This collaborative approach and sort of involving and which happens at a social level, but also at an industry level in organizations. This sort of democratic approach of discussing issues that are emerging in a collaboration, which is also relevant for the leader's role, and then of course education and the importance of education. Is the trust or is the Nordic trust at risk? Yes, but I think I will leave that for further discussion because I think I've definitely used my time.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. So there's a million questions that came out of that. I'm going to save some for the later discussion and also invite other people to sort of join in the discussion through the Q&A. But we did have one question come in through the Q&A about taxation and whether Danish citizens feel that their taxes are being well used. I think people know in the United States that the Nordics in general and Denmark also are high tax, so high social services, but also high tax societies. Maybe I'll fold this into a more general question. You've talked a lot about the high trust environment and also the role of collaboration and the role of the state and the role of unions also in building this sort of collaborative approach to mitigating some of the sort of dangers or managing potential abuses of these otherwise, hugely potentially really helpful kinds of technologies. Can you just say a few words about whether or not, like one of the things one hears in the U.S. is that this, a heavy state involvement or regulatory apparatus or the role of unions, these all serve as a kind of drag on the competitive advantages of firms. And it seems that in the Danish case, we have highly competitive firms that operate within this environment. I know that there are some commentators that think that these constraints are actually quite beneficial and that they become a source of competitive advantage. Do you want to just make a comment on that, and then we'll maybe turn to Rasmus?
Yeah. So briefly, yeah, I actually think we've managed to turn them into a competitive advantage. I think the main point is that, and I think that's actually relevant also for this sort of distributed digital environment we are coming into, is exactly sort of the diversity and inclusion of various parties in this. So and that's exactly what we ensure. We ensure acceptance, credibility in the decisions that are made. The process around the Disruption Council is a good example of that, where we had trade unions, industry, academia, and representatives from society part of sort of that discussion about how to manage some of the challenges of digitalization on society. I don't think we cracked it all and we've solved it all, but by or through that collaborative approach, you have the main stakeholders part of whatever comes out of the discussion, and that equals a little bit sort of the good design process or innovation process that an industry will need in the digital society, and the ability to move precisely and quickly. Tax is actually one of the biggest risks to the trust at all. We have a very high acceptance of the high level of taxes. We do that because the transaction is positive for the citizens. I mean, you can see easily that you gain through education, healthcare, infrastructure, so forth. But it's also an ongoing trade-off, and I think trust is not a given. It has to be nurtured. And in the tax area, I think trust is at the moment fairly low, because fraudsters actually manage to fraud or defraud the system for $1.6 billion, and so we've all seen how that was not managed super well, and that just underlines the fact that there are risks to the model of trust, and it has to be nurtured and taken care of. Similarly, we've seen examples of corruption lately that are also paying to that.
Great, thank you. And another couple of questions have come in, one on surveillance, and we'll return to a lot of these issues, I think, after Rasmus is going to be addressing similar kinds of issues. So let me take this moment to welcome Rasmus Hawk. Rasmus is the Chief Technology Officer at 2021 AI, which is an AI company that specializes in the implementation of transparent and trustworthy AI solutions and applications for customers and clients really across the world, Europe, Asia, the United States. Rasmus is also an active member of the committee that is developing and promoting international ISO standards for ICT technology in the area of AI. He works with the European Union in developing guidelines and legislation on trustworthy AI, and is the lead partner in an EU-funded project on the governance of disruptive technologies called ETAPAS. He has been working in the area of information technology and data science for 2 decades now. He has a background in engineering and computer science that's going to resonate with many of you who are tuning in from MIT, including my students. He previously worked as an engineer at IBM and has been working with and for global companies involved in a very wide range of sectors: utilities, energy, telecoms, healthcare, finance, transportation, and public services. He has an extraordinarily broad background and really incredible credentials, and we're also extremely fortunate to have him with us today. So Rasmus.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. That was a fantastic intro there. So thank you very much for that. So let me push on the presentation work here. So basically, just a very small introduction to the company. So here at 2021 AI, we develop models together with our partners. We have a technical platform, and we do governance on developing models and applications for that contains AI. And we are working, quickly expanding with a number of projects. So basically, when we talk about data in Denmark, and I think Søren he touched quite a bit on that, and that's good. I have one of these in my desk drawer, and basically what it does is that you press a button and then you get a code on it, and using that, my CPR number and my password, then I can log in to a lot of different services. One of these services, for example, is my own health portal, and in my health portal I can see all the data that is related to my visits to hospitals, to my general practitioner, to clinics. I can see my COVID-19 tests. I can renew my doc subscriptions. I can book appointments with doctors and hospitals, and I can also choose who can see my medical information. And I can even, to some extent at least, correct some of these medical informations as well. It's also always a collaboration with your GP, obviously, but there's a lot of possibilities there. And as Søren mentioned, you can also get married and divorced using the digital logins. You can, claim your pension, relocate, get driver's license, and banking, investments. I can change ownership of my car. And there's even an email system for exchanging encrypted emails authenticated to various parties in the public sector. So there's a lot of possibilities around data in Denmark, and all of this data obviously makes a nice cocktail for building models and AI, and doing that across the globe. So I would say that. And I think this sort of picture resonates also with the other Nordic countries as well. Both Sweden and Norway and Finland has these systems as well. And basically what you can do then is you can start to build models on top of it, right? So the way you do that is typically that you ingest the data that you have. It might be some health-related data, or other parts. But in this case, I've used an example and just said this is data on houses and housing prices. So I ingest this data, I do some exploration, I maybe do some transformation of this data, and then I train some models and do some experiments with it. And then finally, I do some testing and make sure that the accuracy of this model is correctly or set up correctly. And then I put it into an operational mode where it runs in a production environment, and then you can integrate it with the rest of the systems. And then typically you, on top of that, you also build some lifecycle management that sort of at a regular interval ingests new data or pulls in new data to the system, and then it retrains itself, and then by doing that, it actually learns from the surrounding environment and the data and how the data around it changes over time. Now, based on that, then as a guy with a purple sweater, I can then request I can feed the input of my own house, and I can get out the price of my house, or predicted price of my house. That prediction might be used for applying for a loan or some similar things. And looking at this picture, then I think that, well, all of this looks right. Well, I mean, the problem there is, first of all, that as a user of this system, the only thing I get back is just the price of my house, and it's sort of that there's no explanations to why the price of this house is what it is, and that's actually some of the problems surrounding this. And also, I'm not sure exactly what was the training data used for this. So, I mean, the problem is really that there's a lot of these models around, and just as one example here is the Compass model, which is actually a US-based model. It stands for Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions, and it's about when people are on probation from the jail. Then there is a model that assesses the risk of them committing new crimes when they are checking out of the jails. And basically, you can say this model was introduced around 2013, and it is now in use in New York and Wisconsin, California, and other places. The problem with such a model is that there's actually no explanations to why the risk of these individual profiles are the way they are. The model itself is a black box model. There's no transparency in it, and there's no explanations to the individual people receiving these risk assessments. It's something that a judge would use when they are faced with these decisions. So at least there's a problem. You can say I've just collected a number of issues here from around the globe. Another issue here is this is a Finnish case where which was about a person that were rejected to get a loan on the basis that he was living in the south of Finland in the Swedish in a small Swedish talking population. And it turned out that if he was in fact not a man but a woman, and if he spoke Swedish and not Finnish, he would have gotten a loan. And this bank actually got a fine of 100,000 euros. So these cases actually do occur. The same goes with the Apple credit card scandal, which I don't know if you heard of, but this was the same issue that there were models. It was actually not Apple's own model. It was a model that Goldman Sachs developed that turned out that there was a heavy gender bias on the credit limit for the Apple credit card. In fact, it was around 20 times higher credit limit as a man than as a woman for that. On top of that, you can say that these kinds of models are not only a problem when it comes to the decisions that it makes, but also in the explanations that it does not give. Or the transparency that it does not have. A good example of that is when you Google global warming is, and then there's a number of suggestions for that. What many people perhaps know, in the back of their head, but are not made aware of, is that these search criteria are actually personalized. They are shown because you live in a certain area, because you're a certain type of person, because you have a certain type of search history. And the same goes for the algorithms when we browse through our Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter feeds. The things that we see, they are very much customized to fit your need, creating these echo chambers that we know and have a feel for. But I think the challenge here is basically how can we explain this to people, that how can we explain the user of these systems that this is what is occurring. A more recent example is the OpenAI GPT-3 models, which is a text generating model where you can basically feed it in with a headline, and then it writes an article for you. Which is it's very difficult to distinguish the text that is generated with a real person actually writing it. But it turns out that also the GPT-3 has a lot of bias problems. So for an example being religion and gender and race, which actually stems from the fact that the GPT-3 models, they have been developed using Wikipedia, using a web crawler that basically crawls through the entire internet. And this is why internet trained models, they also have internet scale biases. So that's an interesting case. A more recent case that was just a few weeks ago is a Twitter scandal around the image cropping model that Twitter had implemented in their system, which turned out that it favored a white male rather than anything else. So how can you go in and fix this? And I believe that that in Denmark, I think there's a good way to sort of to have a discussion, an open discussion with stakeholders around what is needed. So one of the things that we are doing a lot is creating these explainable models that not only tells you that the price of your house is 79,000, but also why it is that price. So connecting an explanation to the predictions that you're making to these. But that's actually not the full truth, because one thing is that you can explain a model's behavior. Another thing is that you can actually track all of the conscious or unconscious decisions that were done by the individual stakeholders throughout the entire process of developing this. So all the way from versioning and figuring out what was the training data that you actually used for this, all of the conscious and unconscious decision that every single person did with this model, going through the entire life cycle of the model development. And I mean, obviously, yes, that kind of data or that kind of insight into a model might be a lot of understanding for an end user out there. But on the other hand, it's also very important that this data is actually available in some form. This is why that I think it's very important that on top of the develop and developing these models, that you also have a governance where you can actually go in and you can retrieve this data. You can see what has happened with certain models at certain times, and you can also interact with certain stakeholders to get their feedback and their input to whether these models were developed in a way that makes it socially and environmentally acceptable as well. But then the question becomes then, what is ethics actually? How are we ethical, and how are we developing this in a responsible way? And as Søren also mentioned, there is a lot of frameworks out there, and they are being deployed throughout the world at the moment, which is a good thing. It's really good. And the manual around them seems to be that, well, we have some type of AI technology, we have some societal values, we have some privacy levels of the data being used. So is it personal data, is it non-personal data? And there is a number of people being affected by these models. And there's also a certain risk severity. For example, it could be a self-driving car that makes a decision to, go over the cliff or run down some person. So that's a relatively high risk, where as a credit rating model, for example, that might be a little bit lower risk, but still there's a significant impact to several or group of persons. And finally, you have the probability of the risk happening and occurring, and then the range of the AI governance tools, which is currently in effect. And these simple categories seems to be able to define what kind of levels of governance you need for it. However, the general problem with all of these ethical frameworks is that it's very high level. It's very difficult for the technical people and for the politics and the governments out there to sort of take these ethical frameworks and then turning into practice. So there's a lot of theory out there, but not enough applied work when it comes to governance. So enter, for example, EU, which has done a great job in setting up some really good guidelines, and those guidelines, and that also goes for the US, by the way, to set up guidelines. They're usually focused around the issue of transparency, fairness, accountability, and explainability, and many of them also have areas around human agency and oversight. And privacy and data governance, obviously, which is a key element, and also societal and environmental well-being. So treating the environment well, and treating society well by developing these models and engaging with stakeholders around that. The EU regulation and legislation on this is focused around giving some recommendations to the member countries, which will hopefully and quite likely take effect start of next year in a number of European countries, which will be focused on a risk-based approach to all AI models being developed in the member countries. So that's a fairly interesting approach, but it's still not in effect. But I'm thinking that start of next year will probably hit us. Another thing that we've done in Denmark specifically is that we've introduced mandatory legislation for AI and data ethics, and that is so what it concretely is that in around 1,500 of the biggest companies in Denmark, they are now required starting from start of next year to include a data ethics and AI ethics statement in their year-end reports. And they need to have this, and they need to be able to explain why, how that permeates into, the functions and the algorithms and the models that runs within that company. So that is a very concrete set of legislation that sort of that states exactly that this is the responsibilities for these companies. And but I still think it's only a start to where this kind of legislation will go. But the overall problem is that it happens too slow, because a lot of these models and a lot of the problems that I've shown you now is something that's been existing for many years. So definitely, I think we need more legislation and more regulation, and we need to do it faster. But we also need to do it smartly, so that it's not, that it's not that we just stop all progress. So that's an important point in that as well. Another idea is around using certification or marking. So you all know the Energy Star and MSC, sustainable seafood, for example. But you could do the same thing for AI. So you could do an AI certification that would rank, different models or different companies based on fairness and transparency and explainability features. So that's a very interesting thought that we're actually working together with a number of companies to develop. So in short, I think that the Nordic model for how AI is being developed and applied in terms of data and in terms of models, it can work. And I think the important point is that you, through the governance process, that you make applications that is transparent, that is fair and accountable, that has this human oversight, that also support and enforce these societal and environmental values of the society. And finally, and that's maybe the most important one, is that it is a collaborative work, so that you work with the stakeholders, the government, and the community for continuous feedback. If you don't have that public debate within a certain area or certain model, then you always risk coming out into this distrust relationship between the users of these models and the people developing them. So, and then just a final word on the organization. You can sign up for an ethical AI newsletter on our webpage, and yeah, I think that's it. So.
Great, thank you so much. This is fascinating, and there are a bunch of questions, but I'll just ask one question of Rasmus before we turn to the more general discussion. And I think you've hit on a point that is a big concern in the United States about the use of AI, which is, everybody's, or not everybody, but people are becoming a little more familiar with issues having to do with, sort of these potentially discriminatory uses, racial profiling in police work, kind of baked into the algorithms, employers having access, to health records. There's a lot of worry about, the communication across these different platforms, and if employers have access to, I don't know, mental health records for individuals, that would be a worry, and especially if all of this is contained on the little device that you pointed out. So maybe could you, one of the big points that came out of your presentation was the importance of stakeholder participation in sort of bringing unconscious decision, this unconscious bias to light, and therefore as a kind of check on things that even maybe the programmers are not really consciously, sort of doing intentionally. Can you say a word about, like, who are these stakeholders, and, like, doesn't involving more stakeholders also then mean permitting greater access to these data? So like, how does that work concretely? Like, who are these stakeholders? Are they the same ones that Søren was talking about, labor unions and state regulators and so on? And how does that then expand the number of parties who have access to this information? And I'm asking this against the backdrop of worries in the American context of, we don't have the same high trust, unfortunately, environment that you all have.
So I think that when we talk about stakeholder involvement, I think it's the first ones that needs that you need to work together with are the users, obviously, right? The users of the models and the system, which means that if it's for example, a model that predicts the risk of cancer or COVID-19 or something like that, well, then obviously you need to engage in that public debate with the citizens of the country first, right? And to get that acceptance and that trust to be able to start developing it, and start thinking about, well, do we need to have explainability? Do we need to look at the transparency? Do we need to know exactly what kind of data that we use for it, and so on? And once you have those sort of elements and components in place, then you can start to build a solution, and not the other way around, that you just start doing some work and then you come back afterwards and you have distrust from the users, right? So definitely the users, but also there is definitely a governmental concern here, because some of the transparency issues that I mentioned is also very difficult to sort of relate that back to a normal user in a way that makes them understand what is the impact of this. And this is why I mentioned the part around certification and marking, because once you have that, then perhaps that's a way to sort of simplify and to have some other party sort of be the guarantee that this company is doing what is right.
Great. Well, let me go to a couple of the questions that we got a number of really great questions here. One question that's being raised, and this is for both of you or either of you, which is sort of follows on that is the question about what, one of the things that makes it difficult to, you're calling for more regulation, but a smart regulation, not just any old kind of regulation. And one of the issues is often that regulators themselves don't have necessarily the technical expertise to be able to, distinguish between the smart and the maybe not so smart. So one question that's come in is, are regulators in the Nordics actually trained, trained in these technologies so that they can actually intervene in a sophisticated sort of informed way rather than just in a kind of knee-jerk way? That's for either of you or both.
I think the answer is that is exactly the big challenge and the big dilemma as we go forward. How do we translate the risks and the possibilities of the systems, and how do we translate that into a way that regulators and society actually can understand? And I think the answer is the regulators are being trained. I don't think we can say that we have that sufficient level of knowledge, and perhaps the real challenge is that we will never get there, because this is a highly dynamic development. We don't know what AI can do next year or the year after or the year after. I mean, this is really developing, perhaps not as rapidly as we all thought, but still it is a highly dynamic development, and it will be an ongoing challenge for society that we have to take very seriously. So the legislators have, by and large, some knowledge. They are not trained sufficiently in any of the Nordic countries. I think there's a good basis to do that, and that is certainly one of the very big challenges going forward.
Great. I have a question also for Rasmus here, asking, can you comment on a somewhat common concern about proactive regulation, sort of following on what we've been talking about, or proactive regulation and legislation of AI research? How does it impact the rate of innovation? Does it prevent, does it?
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot of times, and I think the first thing you've got to start with is transparency, right? So once you have transparency, and you sort of start with some lightweight or heavyweight legislation or regulation that starts with compelling and making the companies truly transparent in terms of their models and their algorithms. And that is actually not that, in my opinion, not that big a deal for them to do that, because we're talking about taking some of the metadata, some of the, for example, the accuracy of the model, the types of data that you ingested to build the model, and just bringing it out in a public context. And I think most of the companies out there are ready to do that today, without a lot of additional work for them. If you want to take it to the next level and say, for example, we require all models out there to be fair or to be fully have no bias or stuff like that. I think that's a whole different step, and that probably requires companies to be more to put in some more work to it. And I think at the stage that we're in now, I think getting to transparency is an important first step, right? and then let's take it from there.
Okay. So we only have about 3 minutes left, so very short answers. You know, you've been talking about the context and the way in which this facilitates these kinds of strategies and the high trust. Is there anything are there any takeaway points that that translate easily in a somewhat lower trust environment, especially when it comes to AI? I think there's a lot of skepticism on the part. There's a lot of enthusiasm in a country like the US, but there's also quite a lot of skepticism about the extent to which, you know, about the possibilities of surveillance and the possibilities of unethical uses of these. And even in a context in which maybe companies themselves, you know, sort of commit, you know, in a kind of self-governing kind of way to ethical principles, a lot of worry about self-regulation and so on. Are there any quick lessons that we might be able to take back to the U.S. context? I mean, you also deal with American companies or Danish companies operating in the United States and vice versa. And so, do you see differences in the way they operate, perhaps as a second piece of that?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to get a short answer to that, but I think you know, the point around having a simple system for expressing transparency, like a kind of a certification, would be a really nice way for US-based company to show that they are treating their users in an ethically correct way, depending on their policies, right?
Søren, you have the last word.
Okay, education. We need to increase the general sort of savviness and understanding of what we are dealing with here at all levels: legislators, citizens, users, whatever. So education at so many. I mean, there's a very good Finnish model for how you can sort of make a program to teach the entire society, and there's a lot to build on there. Definitely not done it, but education.
That's a great way to end, not least because the Nordics are really kind of known for not just advanced high-tech companies, but they also all feature really sophisticated users of these technologies, you know, with a high level of digital competence, as one of the slides pointed out at the beginning. And that actually seems like an important check also on the direction that these technologies take. So it just remains for me to thank you all so much. Thanks again to Dansk Industri for helping us at MIT Misty Denmark. Thanks so much, Rasmus and Søren, for these really stimulating presentations. We could have gone on, but thanks in the meantime, all of you. And thanks also, Madeline, for setting this all up. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.